This will be the final video on our exploration unit and talking about how the world kind of came together in the first globalized age. So once Columbus made it to the Americas, kind of the final connection between Europe and Africa and Asia and the Americas finally came together. So this became known as the exchange. The Columbian Exchange is known as the global transfer of foods, plants, animals, ideas, technology, and disease during the colonization of the Americas. This is going to have huge impacts on the world because of the new amount of goods and new kinds of food, but also the spreading of diseases and things like that. It's going to make a big impact in many different populations. There was lots of new animals and plants that were shifted throughout the world, and this expanded with trade. Some of these items you can see in these images right here are tomatoes, tobacco, cotton, and potatoes. So in terms of exchange from the Americas to Europe, Asia, and Africa, by far the most important crops were corn and potatoes. You need to know this. Both corn and potatoes are very inexpensive to grow, and they're also very nutritious, and are used for a lot of staples in many different places in the world today. So both crops became important parts of diets throughout the world, and it really helped people live longer because they had more energy and more carbohydrates, and it led to have a significant role in boosting the world population. Beforehand, nowhere else besides the Americas had these two crops, and they became very important staples for a majority of the rest of the world. From Europe, Asia, and Africa to the Americas, you had the exchange of kind of some large animals, livestock in particular, horses, cattle, sheep, and pigs. And some foods that went as well were bananas, black-eyed peas, yams, wheat, rice, barley, and oats. So all this stuff kind of leads to the baking of bread and things like that. And maybe you associated bananas with Latin America or Central America, but they actually originated in Africa themselves. So here's an image of some of the different things that were transferred around the world. And starting in Europe, we're looking at, obviously a lot of these diseases, we've talked about this before, had a devastating impact on the Native American populations. The introduction of livestock to the Americas, as well as some of these grains, is going to it's going to increase life expectancy and things like that in the Americas significantly. Maybe tobacco and quinine. Maybe you don't know, but quinine is actually an ingredient in tonic water, but is also known to help fight off malaria, which is going to be ravaging a lot of the tropic regions. Also, you might be surprised to see that tomatoes were actually originated in the Americas because we associate tomatoes with Italian cooking. So it wasn't actually until the 1500s that Italians started using tomatoes in their cooking. So global trade during this time really increases. So colonial empires are influenced by Europe besides just the food that's going on. So there's new wealth, and overseas trade has a huge impact on the world. People are starting to make a lot of money. This is the establishment of kind of the first huge gap between the very, very wealthy and kind of just the poor. So they create new businesses and trade practices in Europe, and this connection between the Americas and Europe is going to make a whole lot of people wealthy. And so this is kind of the development of the first age of capitalism, right? And capitalism, you need to know, is an economic system based on the private ownership and the investment of resources for profit. It's very different from capitalism and socialism, which we'll be talking about later on in the year. So the idea of this is that individuals, not only governments, have wealth. And so merchants at this time, because of trade, are starting to become very wealthy. And this increases the nation's money supply as the merchants make more and more money. But this leads to inflation. And inflation is when the cost of good increases significantly, but income or payments don't. So inflation, it makes it harder to buy things at that point. And this is a major reason why Spain actually crumbles and goes from a world leader to kind of just a secondary European power after the 1700s. You also at this time had the development of something called a joint stock company. And a joint stock company is similar to a modern day corporation. It's the idea that investors buy shares in a stock in a company. You all reap the benefits of the profits, but you also all share the risks of the investment. So, for example, if people got together to build a joint stock company that wanted to go explore the United States, if that group of people, if the ship got to the United States and made a lot of money and came back, then everybody would share in the wealth. But if it was lost, everybody would lose just a little bit instead of the full cost of the expedition. In the 1500s and 1600s, joint stock companies for American colonization were established, and they actually had to get a charter from the King of England to really start a new colony in what would become the United States. Another economic system that was flourishing at this time is called mercantilism. And this is an important concept for you guys to understand, so please make sure you understand all that's going into this. So the idea of mercantilism and the base premise behind it is that a country's power depends mainly on its wealth. So the idea that a country wants to get as much gold as possible and become as rich as possible, and that kind of equates their power. So you increase this wealth in two ways. One, by obtaining as much gold and silver as possible. So that's what Spain was trying to do in the Americas, is trying to mine and just take gold and silver. Another way to do it is to establish a favorable balance of trade. So the idea is that you sell more goods, more manufactured goods, than you buy. So in order to do this, countries wanted to become self-sufficient. And so this is where the importance of colonies comes in. And I'm going to explain on the next diagram how this actually works. And this leads to some changes in society where merchants and monarchs gain wealth, while most of the rest of Europe is still pretty poor. And we'll see the consequences of that, especially with the French Revolution coming up in the not too distant future. But anyway, this is an example of mercantilism. All right, so let's assume that England wants to get money. Now, there's two ways to do that. They can try to go to America and find gold, but unfortunately, North America doesn't really have that much gold. So instead, what they can do is they can set up plantations and produce a cash crop, such as, in this example, cotton. So the colonizers, or the colonists, are growing cotton here in the United States, what will become the United States. And what they have to do is they actually have to sell their raw materials. So they sell the raw cotton back to England. When it gets back to England, what England does is they produce cloth, and then they can either sell it to the rest of Europe, or they actually sell it back to the Americas. So the manufactured cloth goes back here. So they buy the cotton cheap, manufacture it in England, and then ship it back either across the Atlantic Ocean or just across the English Channel. Either way, England is losing just a little bit of money when they're buying the raw materials, but gaining a lot of money when they're selling the manufactured good. So this is one way that the mercantile model can help England gain more gold, which is kind of the point of mercantilism.